Hello everyone, welcome to another time on Indigenous Hands, the Indigenous Voices, which is brought to you by Save the Deaf and Endangered Languages Initiative. Today I'm bringing to you another deaf signer in the topic that we started a couple of weeks ago, learn from your Indigenous deaf signers. So you remember that we had been here with Aisha and we learned a lot. Today we're going to be learning a lot from Murtala, another deaf signer, and we are going to learn from his interview, how he introduced himself as an Indigenous deaf signer, and we are going to try to elicit some handshakes and movements and locations that could be found in his signing. But in general, we're looking for the skills of signing from this young signer. And so this is still the Indigenous Hands, the Indigenous Voices. We're going to go over right now to see Murtala in his interview. The first set of the signs we're going to be looking at is the introduction of the interview, and the interview begins with "What is your name?" as you saw on the screen. And the sign for "What is your name" in this community is a sign that we have several times described or possibly presented here. And so the sign, which is one of my favorite signs, of course, is featured in this interview, and the response to that, "My name is." The sign, "What is your name?" If we look at the sign, we will discover that the interviewer, who is also a deaf signer, but a bilingual deaf signer, in addition to the signing, the movement, he made a sound which sounded like a hissing sound by sucking in some air with his mouth half closed, and you heard a sound like and this is my first time of observing this sound, which is very interesting. And of course, we have explained this sign, "What is your name?" the cultural nuances that follow the sign, which of course is derived from the cultural activity that happens when a child is being named, which is the act of killing a ram, a cow, or any animal on the naming ceremony. I am so excited to know that this sound accompanies a hissing sound. So this sign carries the embodiment of that entire activity. What is your name? If you look at the sound, it has about 3 movements. The first movement goes across the neck or the throat with the index finger slashing the throat, coming back to point at you and what? These are the 3 movements that we can elicit from the sign, "What is your name?" Before the sign, "What is your name?" the interviewer started by asking, "How are you?" And let's look at that again. Alright, the interviewer began by asking Murtala, hope you are fine. Hope you are fine, which is a way to ask, how are you? And the response, yes, I'm fine. So in this community, this is part of the greeting. And the greeting goes with some kind of nod requesting an answer. So the movement and the handshake in accompaniment with the nodding of the head or the facial expression completes the question, you fine? Yes. And then followed by the sign, what is your name? Which comes from the slashing of the throat, you what? And Murtala answered by saying, they call me my name here. They call me Long Nose. Murtala's name is signed on the nose, tracing the nose downwards to signify that he has long nose. Now, the story behind his name, as we heard it, is that the deaf community calls him Long Nose because it is believed that his nose is long. And this speaks to much of the collections that we have been making about sign name or name sign in the deaf communities across Nigeria. And we have expressed this in many of our videos and presentations in conferences about how people are named or how names are signed in the various deaf communities. One of which is names are signed descriptively. That means that people are named according to their features. And this can be a physical feature or a concrete feature or an abstract feature. This can be any feature that you can, with which you can identify a person. For Murtala, his name is signed on the nose, tracing down the nose to identify or to signify that he has a long nose. Another Murtala may have his name signed on a different location. And just like we have presented several times, names are signed more on body location than in the neutral space. And they are more signed than finger spelled. And again, this is because finger spelling is not an inherent property of indigenous sign languages in Nigeria, and I might say in Africa. Finger spelling is associated with American Sign Language and English, and finger spelling is a borrowed property of signing or signing system in Nigeria. So when a person signs their name and possibly finger spells it, that is additional feature to help a person to understand what the name is. In an indigenous deaf community, I think this is a little bit of a challenge whereby names are not finger spelled because the people that are signing are not very familiar with finger spelling. It is not part of their signing system. And this also is one of the features that we seem to kind of wonder about. How do people know people's name signs just by mere signing it? One of the reasons could be because, of course, these names are given in the deaf communities by the deaf people themselves. And yeah, it could be the person taking up the name or the peers giving the name, but you find out that, as we have found out, generally people know other people's names when they sign their names and they don't need to finger spell it. And so this is very interesting, and of course it's one of the aspects that have really caught our interest in the documentation series that we'll be making. So we can relate with Murtala as he signs his name, tracing the nose down. And it is worthy of note that ordinarily his name Murtala does not have anything or has little or nothing to do with the nose. So his nose is just the feature that tells who he is, irrespective of what name he was given. That is very interesting. These are a few segments of Murtala's interview that we're going to elicit today. Remember that we are not necessarily looking at these as we did in Aisha's case, looking at handshakes differently, looking at movements and locations differently, but we are taking a chunk of segments from this interview, and we're going to continue looking at Murtala's interview in the next week. This is the Indigenous Hands, the Indigenous Voices. In this program, every week here, we come to talk about the indigenous sign languages of African deaf communities. And our aim is to promote, to develop these sign languages, to ensure that these sign languages have equal opportunities in the free space, in the global space, in the electronic space, in the digital world, to grow and develop and be there preserved for posterity. I want to see you here again next week. Please keep sharing our videos. Subscribe, please, to this channel, the Indigenous Hands, the Indigenous Voices. Bye-bye.